this on?
I think we're live.
I think we're live.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barb Darrow, Greg DeMichillie, and I would like to open this up for questions at 5 minutes towards the end, so if you have questions for the Google Cloud guy, now's your chance. So, Google is a huge, dominant company in search and advertising. Tell us, and it's coming on in cloud, but huge entrenched competitor. Tell me why, say, a large Fortune 500 company would go for you guys versus Amazon or Azure.
Sure. So when we talk to customers, I would say, first of all, every company is different. Every company has its own unique set of challenges. But I think there's sort of three categories that things fall into. The first is, the fact is Google has been running what is probably the world's largest private cloud for about the past 15 years. If you think about from the time we first started investing in data centers, carrying that through to building our own cables that connect under both the Atlantic and the Pacific. I never knew you had to design cables to be shark-proof, but it turns out sharks like to eat underwater cables. And
Sharknado.
Well, they don't have lasers on them yet, at least, so we're safe on that front. So in general, there's an understanding that from a infrastructure perspective, whether that's the amount we invest in the infrastructure or whether it's the operational experience, that we have proven ability to run infrastructure at scale. The second, I think, big driver we see a lot is around data and analytics. And if you think about it, just about every Google service that you interact with as a consumer, at its heart is about finding the needle of value in the haystack of data. Right? Whether it's you go to Google search and you type for who knows what and you get relevant content, whether it's Gmail that said, hey, unlimited email storage and just search. Don't bother putting things into folders, just search and find what you need. Or Waze and Google Maps where you take all of this traffic sensor data that was been around for a long time and suddenly figure out how to route you around it. All those services at their heart are about extracting value out of data, and that every big company I talk to, that is one of their top two challenges they have. A few years ago, your challenge was how do I store the data? And you bought tape appliances and robotic arms and just all sorts of crazy stuff. Well, you can store data in the cloud for $0.01 a gig a month. Like, you can afford to be a digital pack rat. Like, why decide what to store? It's so cheap to store. But now we just shifted the problem. So the problem is, instead of how do I store the data, now the problem is how do I figure out what's the value in it? And so people realize that at Google we have built a lot of tools and expertise around exactly how to do that. And we can talk everything from the origins of Hadoop and coming out of MapReduce to machine learning, but that's clearly an area. And the third one that we've really seen come up is around the idea of open source, openness, and open APIs. Cloud is a really interesting opportunity to not repeat mistakes of the past, to take the openness that Linux brought to the world and to actually make sure that as we move to the cloud that we don't take a step back away from this amazing world of open source and open development and open APIs. And so we are big believers in being open source givers as well as beneficiaries of open source.
Is that opposed to someone else?
This is our strategy and our approach. We all benefit from open source. Anybody who does anything with Linux today is a beneficiary of work that Linus did at the very beginning. Go farther than that. We are beneficiaries of the fact that Vint Cerf and Bob Metcalfe decided that the core internet protocols would not be encumbered by patents and they'd be open for anybody to build on top of. We have a lot of smart people at Google. We do not have a monopoly on smart people. And so for cloud to be everything it can be, it's going to take a lot of developments from a lot of companies. And so we are not just investing in open source projects that already exist. You heard Joe talk about Kubernetes today. Open sourcing that was a fundamental design point. You heard TensorFlow was mentioned in the previous talk on the machine learning space. Us open sourcing the technology that powers Google Brain and all of our machine learning. We really believe that we benefit, we believe customers benefit. So I think those are the three ones: infrastructure, data and analytics, and then our philosophy around open.
So I wanted to push back on one thing. I mean, not push back, but Brian.
Oh, we've known each other, Barb.
Yes. Okay, I'm pushing back. Brian Stevens was at a conference in Boston last week or 2 weeks ago, and he made a this open source stance is different. It's something different for Google from traditionally. He said on stage, he said Google used to be thought of as the place where open source went to die or to disappear, and that has changed in the last 3 or 4 years with Kubernetes and.
Well, far be it from me to disagree with my CTO, but I guess I will if that's what was actually said. I didn't hear the comment. There are at least 6 or 8 projects open source project where Google has over 10 years of commitment to. Git, Linux, C++. So we have been active contributors. I think the difference is, for a while, the way we exposed the innovations that we produce is through academic research papers.
Right.
We published a research paper on MapReduce, which then sparked Hadoop. We published research papers on software-defined networking. And I think what we've added on to that is now we not only produce the research papers, but we produce the code in a form that anyone can use. So we've always been sharing our innovations at one level. Now we've just added on source code as one of those ways that you share it.
And no one, I don't think anyone in this room or anyone where would dispute that Google has tremendous technology. The issue seems to be that there are not that many companies in the universe that run at Google scale, so you have to kind of figure out a way to make that scale applicable to, not just Fortune 500 companies, but
Sure.
mid-market companies.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, that seems
Yep.
to be the quibble with you.
Sure, not everybody will ever, very few people will grow up and be the scale of Google. Many people don't even want to be like Google. We're a funny place. But I think what you do see is the problems that we faced that caused us to build our infrastructure are pretty universal. They're problems like, how do I make my developers incredibly productive? Because the fact is, we're all software companies. I think James Governor's quote from Red Monk was great, which is the only sustainable advantage in an era of unprecedented technological change is unleashing developer talent. So we're all trying to do that. We face that. How do I find value of data? How do I make IT a competitive asset, not just a cost center that I cut 10% every year? So the things that motivated us to build our infrastructure, I think, are universal. Yes, not every company wants to be Google, or not every project is going to be the size of Google Search, but those core problems are the same. And I think in terms of how we talk to small companies, or mid-sized companies, or enterprise companies, a lot of it is about focusing on what are the problems that you actually face.
And so you need feet on the street, don't you? You need, IBM, people malign IBM now, but IBM has customer relationship, it has partner people, it has sales engineers. Can you give us an update on what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. First of all, this is one of the fastest growing, not only businesses at Google, it's one of our fastest investment areas too. If you look at the rate at which we're hiring, not just in engineering, although our growth here in Seattle is pretty phenomenal. We're bursting at the seams in our Fremont facility. Kirkland, we just added another building. We've now broken ground on a new building in South Lake Union that's going to be basically Google Cloud, because our growth here. But it's not just in engineering. It's in all of those go-to-market pieces, absolutely. Sales engineering, technical support.
Taking a big customer out to dinner every once in a while. That,
Yes.
Like people like hand-holding. And,
Oh, of course. And I think that's one of the things that we find when we engage with the customers. We do approach it a little bit differently. We try to get to as much as we can, an engineer-to-engineer conversation. Yes, people want sales execs. Yes, people want technical account managers. But we find with a customer like HSBC or the Home Depot, when we can get a real Google engineer who's working on data flow, sitting with an executive or an architect at Home Depot or at HSBC, the conversation just becomes a lot deeper, a lot more meaningful, and a lot more valuable to the customer. So we really do we really do value an engineer-to-engineer conversation, in addition to sales and support and all of those sorts of things. And we find that the customers that we engage with really, really value that. They like that we're not just sending in an army of consultants, that we're actually sending in very technical people who can understand their problems at a specific level, not at sort of an ethereal level.
You touched on something I was told to ask you, which is whether Google's cloud center of gravity is shifting from up here in Seattle area back down to the Mountain View area.
Yeah, definitely not. For those who don't know, our infrastructure as a service product, GCE, that was founded here in Seattle, as was Kubernetes, of course. We also have engineering here for a number of our data analytics products, Dataflow, BigQuery. Cloud is the largest tenant in Seattle-Kirkland of all of Google's businesses, although we also have portions of the Maps team are here, portions of the video conferencing. If you ever use Google Hangouts, the video codec work for that is done here. Not only is the center of gravity not shifting, Seattle and Kirkland are getting more than their fair share of new headcount. And there's a couple reasons. One is this is a great place to do cloud. I mean, the fact is you
can go raid the other guys.
It's between the University of Washington, between the startups that are here, between the Valley companies that are here. This is a great place for cloud talent. The second part is you all live here in Seattle because you want to live here in Seattle. It turns out there's a lot of people like us. And when we go to hire somebody from the East Coast, say, it's often a lot easier to pitch them on relocate to Seattle than it is to relocate to the Bay Area, because they've all heard the economic stories of prices of housing and all those sorts of things. So it turns out this is a great place to hire. We can fill headcount faster in Seattle than we can in the Bay Area.
So one of the things, it's great to talk about workloads moving to the cloud. The discussion up till now from Amazon and others has pretty much been a one-way trip. Amazon even brought out a tractor trailer that would schlep your data to its data centers. What is Google, but a lot of companies want to run and want to continue to run certain workloads in-house and offload some to the cloud and intermingle.
Yeah.
What is the story from Google there?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because, I mean, it's worth mentioning, all of us in this room spend our time on this bleeding edge, but it is important to remember that out of the $1 trillion IT market, even if you take the most aggressive estimates of what cloud revenue currently has, we're in the single-digit percentage of the way there, right? And that transformation is going to get slower as we move adoption from the most aggressive leading edge companies into the mid-market companies, into the fat part of the market. Like, ask somebody when their AS400 goes.
Does anyone here know what an AS400 is? I just want to.
Very
oh,
good.
good. I'm really glad.
I'm glad I didn't say PDP-11 or something, right?
It's an IBM mid-range machine.
Yeah.
For those who don't.
And so it's clear that most companies will live in some sort of a mixed environment for quite some time, and so a lot of it is about how can you be intelligent about which applications you move? And a lot of that has to do with data locality and data services and latency tolerance and a whole bunch of issues. But I think what we find from companies is what they want to do is try to make that transition as easy as possible. And you heard Joe talk about Kubernetes on the compute side. We think fundamentally when you can take the same container-based application development model that's giving you benefits in the cloud, and you can run that on-prem, that becomes pretty attractive. On the big data side, the fact that you can use our data pipeline service, Dataflow, and you can take those same jobs and run them on top of Spark on-prem using Apache Beam as an open source connection model, that becomes pretty interesting. So that's one of the reasons why we think investing in open APIs is really important. Services like Cloud Bigtable have an HBase API as the default API on it in order to make it plug compatible with on-prem infrastructure. So there's no doubt we're going to live in this world where you have infrastructure and applications running on an on-prem environment and a cloud environment. And I do think it's one of the reasons why open source and open APIs are important to enterprises, not just for the reasons that it's good for developers and good for the ecosystem and good for the community, all of which it is, but because it's just good for them.
Well, there's that whole issue of if I move my data to some public cloud and then I decide, yikes, this is not what I wanted, it's expensive and time consuming to move it out.
Yeah, data is obviously, everybody talks about data has gravity. It's certainly true. What we do see a lot of customers do is you don't have to move all of your data. You can do things like move your analytics part, like just take your log file data, move that into a cloud environment, start using technologies like BigQuery to understand it and to dig into it. So we find that's often a foot in the door that customers have. They're like, where do I get started? You've sold me on this vision of the cloud. Like, how do I get from where I am today to this promised land you're telling me about? And a lot of it is around things like starting to look at your data and analytics job. What are the nightly reports? What are the quarterly reports that you're running? How can you do those in a way that are 10x better from a productivity perspective and, oh, by the way, a fraction of the cost? So yeah, absolutely. And it's not just a bandwidth problem. Certainly that is part of it. But it impacts a lot of the pieces.
I may have written this down wrong, but I believe RightScale they do a pretty good cloud report every year. And it's about 1,000 respondents. And this year they asked about multi-cloud. They do every year. And 85% of the 1,002 respondents said they plan a multi-cloud environment, up from 82% last year. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, so even if there's an entrenched dominant player here, there's room for...
Yeah, I mean, I think that this market is so incredibly competitive. I do think you see, and I think Scott alluded to this, there's a certain buy-in to be in the cloud business, right? You have to have a willingness to spend on the order of tens of billions of dollars a year in CapEx. If you either don't have the financial ability to do that or the willingness to do that, it means you don't get to run your own cables that connecting your data centers, which means you're at the whim of whatever the local connection happens to be. It means you can't put compute capacity close to your end users. It means you can't invest in the economies of scale that you get. And economies of scale, by the way, everybody thinks that means I buy in bulk and I get a discount. And that's
part of it.
It's part of it. It absolutely is part of it. But it also means things like we get early access to Intel Skylake processors. It means we have the ability to invest in custom hardware at every level of the stack. When you're at the scale we are, you don't buy standard network hardware. You design network hardware that's custom designed for cloud environments, and it means you can do that at every level of the stack. If you're buying off-the-shelf servers, you are at a disadvantage, both from a cost perspective and from a security perspective and all those other sorts of things.
The main cloud guys are all going with open compute, I think, or
I don't know what
their own design.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. Amazon and Microsoft and Google, we've all talked about this. We all design our own custom racks, our own custom systems. At Google, like I said, we do that both for a tech reason and a security reason. We heard the discussion about security, and I think it's worth mentioning. I really echo Scott's comment about it's a shared responsibility. But the key phrase we talk about is layered defense in depth. Security is not a pixie dust you sprinkle over a system and it is now secure. You have to block every possible attack at every level of the stack, because all it takes is one failure to be a failure. So we do that at all the way down to the chip level. You can't see, but I actually have our Titan security coprocessor pinned to my sweater here.
Google is tagging its employees.
We have a custom chip that we put into every motherboard, every network card that verifies that there's not been any hardware tampering at boot time. So we verify the root chain of trust all the way down to the motherboard and the network card. And again, that's defense in depth. People say, well, don't you have security to keep bad guys out of your data centers? And the answer is, of course. We do everything from laser intrusion detection, and there's alligators around the data center in South Carolina. Now, we didn't put them there, but we didn't evict them either when we built the data center. There are, honest to goodness, there are alligators around that data center. So, but defense in depth means you don't just trust that. You do that at every level of the stack. And so, again, if you're not investing order tens of billions of dollars in CapEx, and I think Charles Fitzgerald's going to have a session later today and talk about that. If you're not doing that, you're not able to play, you're not able to invest at that level.
So having said that, I mean, the conventional wisdom, if you talk to like Lydia at Gartner, is that there's kind of Amazon, Microsoft coming on strong, Google is the third kind of scale person, and then there's kind of everyone else. Is that the way you see the market?
When we are in competitive situations, we see the exact people you would expect we see. We see a lot of Amazon, and we see some of Microsoft. So, I mean, I think realistically, if you're looking at a cloud provider at an enterprise level. Now, having said that, I think companies like DigitalOcean are really cool. I mean, they're doing some really clever things around a great experience for an individual developer who wants a virtual server.
Droplet.
So their droplet model, I think their developer experience for that is really quite good. So I do think you do see specialty cloud providers in various cases. DigitalOcean being one that I have to tip my hat to for the developer experience they deliver. But when it comes to the large-scale providers who are going after running entire workloads of entire businesses that are global businesses, I think it comes down to Amazon, Microsoft, Google as being the ones.
We've seen some companies fall away. HPE kind of backed away. It's about 5 minutes left. If anyone has questions, you want to go to a microphone, we'll take questions. Until I see someone, I'll just keep forging ahead. Is there I think, again, it was Lydia at Gartner who was saying that you guys can benefit from the server and ad business because you have these relationships with consumer companies like Coca-Cola and stuff. And she said she thought that Google was getting cloud business by virtue of those relationships. I don't know if you can talk about that. They want to use BigQuery. They want to.
Yeah, I think when you think about quasi-verticals, obviously digital marketing is one of those quasi-verticals, and certainly there are ties there with YouTube and our other advertising businesses or channels on that side. But I think most of the big businesses that we look at, HSBC, they're not. It is a vertical and a segment that we get some business from, but I don't think it's not the dominant one or anything like that. It is an important one, and it's certainly something we want to be able to offer an end-to-end solution. If you are using Google Analytics, you can get your analytics data put into BigQuery. So if you want to do more sophisticated slicing and dicing of your web traffic than analytics does, you can just start writing BigQuery. So it is something we do, but it's one vertical that we sort of focus on.
We got a question right here. Can you just say who you are and then?
Hello, this is Tiger Fong coming from Seattle Technical Forum. I've been running the forum for about 8 years so far. We're organizing Seattle events all around the Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, all of them.
Your question is?
In fact, I do have two questions. One is what do you see about the hybrid cloud market? The other one is what do you see about the Latin America cloud market? Thank you.
So what is the hybrid cloud market? I mean, I think we talked about that earlier. I think the transition to cloud for large enterprises will be a staged environment. There are very few enterprises that can take a Frankenstein switch approach from I was on-prem, ka-chunk, now everything's in the cloud. So hybrid is going to be, I think, the I want to say perpetual, because actually I don't think that's true. But it will be a significant period of time that companies are in increasing the amount of work they do in the cloud, decreasing what they do in on-prem, but living in a mode where they're doing both. As far as Latin America, it's certainly a major market for Google. Just as a global company, we are doing a series of international road shows that we call Google Cloud Next. We'll be doing one in Sao Paulo. We just did a developer event there where we overflowed the ballroom and had to rent a quarter of a soccer stadium. Good thing the weather's good apparently in Sao Paulo. So yes, it's certainly a large developing market that we're investing in, and we do our own cables to network connections to South America too. So.
Excuse me, but what's Google's action for the hybrid cloud?
What is our action for the hybrid
Kubernetes
cloud?
stuff.
Well, I think it is the reason we support operating systems and platforms and ISVs that we do is so that whatever you're running in an on-prem environment, you can mix with what you run inside Google Cloud, right? We're a big seller of Windows on GCP because Windows is used in enterprise environments. So I think for a company looking for hybrid cloud, I would say look for openness, look for open APIs, look for the ability that as you modernize and go to the cloud, that you also have the chance to modernize your on-prem environment with technologies like Kubernetes. I think it's many products that make up a hybrid cloud solution.
Okay, there's another gentleman here. Thank you.
Thanks for the chat today. Jeff Borek, Seattle. I was curious, you touched upon open source, and Abby touched upon it as well during her talk. Can you elaborate just a bit more on how Google looks at open source, and how do you manage that across what's now become open source up and down the stack?
Yeah. I think when you look at open source, done right, open source isn't an event. You don't open source a project. We've all seen open source shovelware, where someone takes some source code they had that they weren't doing anything with and they thought was kind of dead, and they just shoveled it out the door and they said, hey, it's open.
Put it on GitHub.
Yeah, well, it used to be SourceForge and now it's GitHub. Real open is community. It's where ideas don't just come from the company that created the software. So a lot of the work is about how do you create environments and communities where developers from outside your organization can contribute as well. And I think Kubernetes and TensorFlow are both great examples of that. The number of contributions for Kubernetes that don't come from Google now, I think we're still a majority, but a bare majority of commits come from Google, which means a substantial portion of the innovation in Kubernetes is coming from companies like Red Hat, IBM, Microsoft now. Brendan Burns, one of the Kubernetes founders, is at Azure doing a lot of great work there. So I think you have to think of open source as, how do I create a community that can accelerate the development? It's not an event. You don't open source something. That's move one of what will eventually be a lot of work to create and support that sort of vibrant community. To do that, you got to give people a feeling that they have skin in the game, that their contribution matters. No one contributes to an open source project where they don't feel like their contributions are valued. And so that has to be the center of what you do. Otherwise, it's just shovelware.
And I think we have time for one more question. And I want to say, just to stress, my comment about Brian Stevens, that he was making a joke.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Werner Köpf. I'm head of engineering of Conversica. We're in Seattle and Bellingham. I have a question. Swami showed a really good slide of the different layers of cloud, like all the way from infrastructure, platform, engines, and services.
Yep.
Could you comment on how the three big cloud providers, like where their focus is in regards to those?
You mean for machine learning? And because
I think in general.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely true. If you think about cloud, people will. There's many ways you can adopt cloud. At the highest level, there's software as a service. We have G Suite, Google Docs, Gmail, Sheets. Concur is here. That is clearly software as a service. And then there are, I think Joe mentioned this as well, it's where do you want to draw the line between what you let the cloud provider handle versus what you want to handle? And your particular place you draw the line will vary based on a lot of criteria. Some people just want infrastructure as a service. They just want to take the same system that they configured and managed in their on-prem data center with VMware, and now they want to do it on a VM run by somebody else. I personally think that's an intermediate state, because the value you get out of developer productivity, of focusing on your core competency, increases as you go up the stack. The more you can build on building blocks that are higher level abstractions, not just virtual machines, the more benefit you get out of your cloud provider because they're doing more for you, and the more focus you get to focus on being a great bank or being a great manufacturing company. I mean, there's the joke, great job maintaining our DNS entries, said no CIO ever, right? And it's true. So it's all about your comfort level of where you are and how far up you want to stack you want to move, and how easy it is to do. One of the things that makes Kubernetes so powerful is it allows you to move up the stack, to treat your data center not as a collection of servers, but as one big computer that has an operating system-like construct on it, but it does it in a way that's familiar, that doesn't require you to like completely throw out how I build applications or to build applications in a completely different pattern. So I think what you're starting to see are these abstractions that allow people to move up the stack, but in a way that still feels comfortable, still feels approachable to them, because enterprises don't necessarily want to change 10 things at once. They want to change one thing, then get comfortable with that, then change something else, then get comfortable with that. So absolutely, you know, we see customers who want to operate at every level of stack. Snapchat is way at the top level of stack. They run entirely on App Engine. They don't worry about anything. Other customers are absolutely at that infrastructure level, but for most of them, that's a waypoint on a journey to getting to a much higher level of automation.
I think we actually are out of time.
Yep.
I'm cutting you off.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.